Welcome to the Filmlings podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is week 3, Carruth's Cerebral Cinema. Hey Alex, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty good. I am super excited about this conversation because these are two movies that I love and don't get to talk about with people very much. So I am super stoked to talk with you about them and kind of break them down.
I am too. It was a roller coaster of a week with these movies, from confusion to frustration to understanding to newfound love. It was its own little 3-act structured plot between me and these movies this week, but they are fascinating movies, and once you really get them, they're really fun to watch and rewatch, and it's worth it. And I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah. So the two movies that we watched are the first one is called Primer, and these are both films by writer, director, actor, composer, editor, cinematographer, Shane Carruth.
Yeah, he does everything.
He does seriously everything. So I had seen both of these films, Primer and the second one, Upstream Color, and Alex had not. So we were coming in at slightly different angles, but even the fact that I had seen them both once a year or two ago doesn't mean too much with these movies, because every time you watch them, you will see something different.
Yeah, that's kind of the point, as we'll get into. But they're built that way. I also find it really interesting that this is the first week where we get to work off of a director's entire body of work. Because these are also the only two movies he's ever directed and made from that standpoint. He's been in a few other projects, a few other TV shows as either an actor or composer or so on, but these are the only two he's made, and they're about 9 years apart, which is fascinating. But it's kind of nice to say that this is his entire body of work, and so we get a comprehensive survey at this point of what he's done so far. Yeah,
we probably won't have that ability for a long time unless we get another director who's only done 2 or 3.
Yeah, I doubt that will happen again for months, if not years.
So just a quick overview of Shane Carruth. He was born in 1972, so he's still alive. He's 44, 45. He graduated from Stephen F. Austin University with a degree in mathematics. So I know, Alex, you like to talk about directors who have had a lot of film school training and how old films influence them, which we'll get into. But he didn't come from a background of intense focus on filmmaking. And you can see in his films the very scientific approach, but it's amazing how science and art mixes in his films in a really beautiful way.
Right. It gives it a very interesting perspective, and he doesn't dumb it down either when he really goes full on engineer, scientific, left brain with his movies. He doesn't dumb it down at all, which you think would serve as a barrier to accessing his films as an audience, but it actually really just adds this really unique and interesting layer that you don't get in other sci-fi films.
Yeah, when you watch it, you don't feel like he's holding your hand, kind of insulting your intelligence by explaining everything to you. He wants you to work to get these movies and to come back to it and just have it kind of stuck in your brain, mulling it over and over again, which I think we both did this week.
He really aims for the smartest audience, and as you know, I made the mistake of trying to watch these movies after very long work days, and that was a terrible decision. And we'll get into more of that later, but it requires, he plays to the most intelligent audience and requires an active audience, but it's worth that, and it's a very unique kind of cinema that gives you more from it if you're willing to put in the work. Yeah.
So let's just jump into Primer, because we've got a lot to talk about.
Right. And we should say from the start here that there's no spoiler-free section this week.
Oh yeah, the whole episode is a spoiler episode.
Yeah, it's impossible to go through these movies without talking about spoilers because they're so intricate and the plots are so complex.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen the films, go watch them right now. All right, I'll just give you a couple seconds. Pause this. Go watch them. All right, great, you're back. You watch them. Go watch them again, and then come back. Okay, now that you have seen the movies twice and have started to understand them, we can talk about them. So, just brief overview. Primer came out in 2004. This is Shane Carruth's first full-length film. Both of these films are actually very short. They're each under an hour and a half, I believe.
Yes.
But they pack as much, if not more, than any 2.5 hour movie you've ever seen.
Oh yeah, 10 times the plot of any 2-hour movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, and character development and all that kind of stuff. So basic story overview of Primer. 4 guys in a garage are developing, I think they're originally trying to create some kind of levitation or hover technology.
Yeah.
And they end up creating time travel by accident. And then two of the guys have to wrestle throughout the rest of the film with the implications of causality and the moral complexities that come with time travel and the application of it.
Right. And they lose the plot of their lives about just as much as we lose the plot of their lives. And they struggle with that and their own sense of whether or not predestiny could be a thing or whether the future is mutable, and so on. But it's oh gosh, I'm struggling here.
So
that's a pretty accurate summary. I'm struggling here.
That's pretty much how it goes. It gets extremely complex in terms of the time travel and some of the other things that happen. 'Cause there are some things that happen with like really big moral significance, like stock market fraud, which is how they end up trying to apply the time travel because it's a fairly safe way for them to do this. They can hold themselves up, learn how the stock market moves, go back to the day before, and then use that knowledge. And that way they kind of keep themselves out of the equation, which is the plan until it all goes to hell.
Yeah. Yeah. The base plan is pretty solid.
Yeah.
And it's to go hide yourself away for a few hours a day, and then repeat those few hours a day, now with the knowledge of what's going to happen in the stock markets, and make as much money from that as you can, without affecting any of the world or breaking, as they refer to it in the film, symmetry, or affecting the world through both of your copies that are in existence at the same time in different places. But it quickly spins out of control as they realize the different things they can do with this technology, and the more as they realize how much power they have, they realize the different things they could accomplish with it, and they're tested to accomplish it. And what's the ramifications of trying to do those things, like punching their ex-business partner who screwed them out of a patent, or trying to get one of their girlfriend's ex-boyfriends arrested at a party, and going through the timeline over and over again and seeing if it's doable and what would the ramifications of using this power to affect your lives be.
Yeah, but all of those like big kind of set piece things, plot points that happen, all take back seat and just serve as a backdrop to the real point of the story, which is watching these two friends work through moral implications from different perspectives. So we've got the first character, Aaron, who's played by Shane Carruth, director, writer, etc. And our second character, Abe. First of all, never name your two main characters with the same first letter, because it makes it really hard to keep up with, and it also makes it harder on you if you're writing the script, because most script software will fill in the name, and if they're different letters,
then it'll just after one or two letters.
Yeah, so don't name your characters with the same first letter.
I feel like they almost wanted to make it a little more confusing.
That's possible. It is. It is possible.
I thought maybe I know we were talking that the names might have some kind of like biblical significance, which is possible, and I haven't found anything to that effect. But I also do not put it past Shane Carruth in the slightest to want to make it a little harder to follow.
Yeah. He but the other thing is he never adds elements just for the sake of confusion. Like everything has a cohesiveness.
Nothing's extraneous.
Yeah. So that's why it's like the names have to mean something, and the only thing I could think of is that they're both Hebrew names. Abe, if we're assuming, is short for Abraham, and Aaron. So
who's the more morally reckless character?
Yeah, so that's what I was getting at.
That tracks.
Abe is our moral agent. He's the cautious agent, and he's kind of he's our guide for the first half of the movie before we realize that at some point Aaron has actually caught up and surpassed Abe in his understanding and usage of this technology. So Abe is always more, okay, wait, we need to stop and think about what this could mean before we do it. Whereas Aaron, as soon as he learns about it, he goes off and essentially, as far as I can tell, he creates an incredibly dangerous situation in order for him to be the hero, which kind of points to some insecurities that in his character that show up a little bit. For example, in the conversation where they're talking about punching his boss in the face, and his wife says something along the lines of, "Oh, my husband will finally be the hero," or something. So you kind of get a sense that he's lived a very reserved life, but he would like to be the big macho guy. Right.
He's kind of got this repressed personality that's starting to come out with the realization of power.
Yeah, and he thinks that if he can do something reckless and then go back and do it over and over again until he does it right and no one gets hurt, then that would be his way to release that insecurity.
Right. And his plans get more and more adventurous and more reckless, while as Abe's whole line for most of the movie is just trying to keep the timelines and copies intact and leave as little impact on the rest of the world as possible.
Yeah. All right, let's talk a little bit about the techniques used to put this film together.
Yes.
Let's see, how do we describe it? Meticulously edited, I will say.
Yes. Well, it's important to keep in mind, especially on Primer more so than Upstream Color. Like you said in the intro, that Shane Carruth wears not just a few hats, but almost all of the hats on set. Yeah. And on Primer, he has credits for basically every department. He wrote, he directed, he acted. He did the editing. He did some of the camera work. He did a lot of the production design. He did all the music. So when we talk about a director and how much control they have over their project and over their story, Shane Carruth has all of the control. All of it.
He may be the closest thing to a pure auteur.
Right.
That I can think of.
Unless he actually, if he were to make a movie with just him and a camera, I think that's the only way that he would get closer to being a one-man film crew than what he does now.
One time I saw someone tweeted out, if you could have a director make a film and give them one guideline, what would it be? And someone's response was, I would have Shane Carruth make a film, but he can only pick one role to fill. And I think that would break him. I think it really would.
I think he could do it.
But he's so good at all of these. Like, I don't think he falters in any of these areas, and he's really good at orchestrating each element to mesh together.
Yeah, and I think that's his forte. I don't think I would want to watch a Shane Carruth movie where he didn't compose, or he didn't have a big hand in the editing, or he didn't at least write and direct. I don't think it would work nearly as well, because these movies are so unique, and I think his brain is just so unique. Like,
yeah, they're almost so too funky. Complex for him to give up or to share that creative power. I mean, obviously films aren't made by one person, and he has a lot of people who help him.
Right.
But he can't share the overall vision with anyone else, because it's uniquely in his head, and he has to direct all of the elements in order for it to come together in the right way.
Right. I mean, I think we had a hard enough time this week just talking between the two of us, trying to explain all of the aspects of both films to each other. I could just imagine him trying to explain it to everyone on set. But they don't need to know. They don't need to know all the bits and pieces of it. They just need to know enough to get their jobs done, and give Shane Carruth what he needs to make the final product.
Yeah, so these two films are very complex in different ways. Primer is much more dialogue driven, whereas Upstream Color is incredibly visuals driven.
Yes.
And the dialogue in Primer is first of all very technical, because it has to be in the fact that it's a bunch of scientists and amateur philosophers, I guess, working through it all.
Right.
But there
was much ado made about Carruth not backing down on wanting to keep all that technical jargon in there.
Yeah. And like we said before, he doesn't try to make people... He doesn't have our characters feed the audience information. We jump in the middle of conversations and have to figure out where we are, essentially.
Right, and when you work exposition. At it makes sense.
He gives you all the things you need. He just doesn't give you all the extra stuff that you're used to. That is essentially
he doesn't hold
like,
your hand.
All right, here we go. This is so here we have them time traveling. Here we have. He gives us a bunch of mysteries and a bunch of clues, and we have to, like, I think you said it's what? How did you put it? You said it's less of a confusion or a mystery than it is a puzzle. It's less of a mystery than a puzzle.
Yeah, it's not his movies. It would be a mistake to call his movies mystery movies. They're puzzle movies where you get to go back over it and figure it out. It's not like a Sherlock Holmes story where there's no way you could figure it out until the last act, when everything is suddenly revealed to you and the entire plot is suddenly brilliant. But all the clues are there for you along the way in a Shane Carruth movie, and you get to pick them up almost like, I don't want to say a Sudoku puzzle, but that's the closest thing I can think of.
Where you get bits and pieces.
I was doing some Sudokus the other day, but essentially,
I can see that. You get a little bit, and you have to fill in what's around that, and there's only really one way for it to work.
Right. There is a solution. You just have to work to get to the solution, and that's the fun of these movies. And I haven't had to think that hard about a movie in a very long time. So when I first watched these movies,
it's really a pity.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of dumbed down cinema out there.
I think that's why I love these movies, is that he expects his audience to think. He makes it an enjoyable watch. So it's not, and you may have had a different perspective on this, because I know you were very frustrated with these movies the first time through.
Yeah, I was also like zonked on being awake for 24 hours when I first tried to watch them. Don't do that.
Probably not the best way. Yeah. These films that demand your attention.
Take a nap and a cup of coffee to anytime you want to watch one of these movies.
Yeah, and get out a pen and paper, maybe. Except for Upstream Color. You need to be watching Upstream Color.
Yeah. Primer is in notes 1. And then Upstream Color is just a visual emotional experience.
I read one review of Primer that the reviewer said, by the end of the film, the audience is turned into Aaron and Abe, wanting to draw out diagrams and make notes and figure out exactly how this all works. And I think that's part of the beauty of it is that watching the film makes you feel like this backyard scientist trying to figure out and come to this great new discovery. And it feels that way in the way that it's shot. It's very
it's got this
home
16
movie-ish. Yeah,
it's shot on 16 millimeter. It looks like home video footage from the 60s, 70s, 80s. When they were in the garage, it almost reminded me of footage I've seen of scientists at NASA in labs trying to figure out how to build the Apollo rockets, and you see them like working on these whiteboards from a distance. But the whole aesthetic just works very well. And I back to what you were saying just a second ago, I like that the movie doesn't try to be smarter than you. So like the characters are just as lost as you are and trying to figure it out as much as you are, and you're kind of in it together. And especially in Primer, as it gets more and more confusing and the characters lie to each other more and more and lie to us as an audience more and more, and everyone just gets confused, and even the characters don't know what's going on in the time travel plots anymore. But it's a mutual journey between you and the movie to try to figure out the movie.
Yeah, so the whole style is partly dictated by the budget. I mean, this is almost as low budget as it comes. This film was made $7,000. And is shot on film, which is expensive. It's 16 millimeter film. I saw that the shooting ratio is 2-1.
Yeah, because they couldn't afford it to be anything less. But 2-1 shooting insane. Ratio is bonkers.
It's so that basically just means that the total amount of footage that they shot, there were 2 minutes of shot footage to every 1 minute of edited footage that made it into the movie. And most films can get up to maybe 10-1. I don't even know what the standard.
Well, I can tell you that on the show I work on right now, our ratio is about 2.5 hours of footage per every 5 minutes of footage that ends up in the final episode, which is way more than 5-1.
Yeah,
way more than 2-1 even. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so that's all to say that this film is extremely well planned out, is very choreographed, and yet it feels extremely natural. The way the dialogue works, it's kind of people are stepping on each other's toes with the lines and all this stuff. It feels almost improvised. Yeah. And like you were saying, voyeuristic in that we're just kind of like dropping in on these characters and seeing their conversations as they happened.
Right.
And yet we know that it's not improvised because it wouldn't fit together so well if every
no way this
line
could be improvised
wasn't planned out exactly.
It's just choreographed so well to that point where, the best way to overcome a low budget, make a really good movie is hard work. And this movie is just dripping with hard work and revisions and rehearsals and plans. And yeah, the camera does feel voyeuristic. There are a few points in the film where I feel like I'm another, as from the viewpoint of the camera, I feel like I'm another copy of Abe or Aaron who's spying on them, especially when they're at the gas station and Aaron is talking about whether or not he should be paranoid.
Yeah,
especially
and
right
it's
then.
doing that weird cutting thing to different angles and stuff. I actually backed the second time I watched it. I backed that scene up and watched their ties just to see if we weren't cutting between different versions of the same day. But it all gelled. It really disorients you, which is perfect because they're getting very disoriented at that point.
That's the point. And they do another way, and I'm not sure whether or not this was initially the plan with the film, or if it just came about because of their budget limitations. But most of the major plot points and some of the major characters, besides our main two, are never on screen. Like,
yeah,
we never.
That's what,
we never.
I think
we
that's
never
why
see,
I say they're kind of a backdrop.
Yeah, we never see Platt, who is the guy Aaron and Abe want to punch.
I think that's Aaron's boss.
Yeah, I can't tell if it's his boss or if it's a guy who screwed them out of a patent, since all four of the guys at the patent office or in the garage experiment were really angry at him. But they also might all work at the same place, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think they all, because there's a line at the very beginning when they're sitting around the table, which is the least exposition-y exposition, because you have no idea what's going on. But but someone says we're all working the same schedule. We're all on the same schedule. So I assume that means that they were all working in the same office, and then I just assumed that Platt was their boss.
Yeah, it makes sense. That makes sense. But yeah,
so,
we don't even.
That was the last thing that I wanted to say about this. Is that there are a lot of little things that go by that just, they feel like elements put in there to make the world fleshed out, but they end up becoming elements that are extremely important to the story that you didn't realize when you watched it the first time. And when you watch it the second time, you're like, oh, that's why he did that. Oh, yeah. Shoot, that's why he did that. I did that in both of these movies. And that's,
for sure.
That's part of the fun of rewatching them.
I want to ask you something real quick. I enjoyed it about 10 times more the second time I watched it. And I know, like I said before, I was a little out of it the first time I watched it. So I was curious, did you enjoy it more the second time you watched it?
Yes. So, like I said, I've seen it a year or two ago. So technically, the first time I watched it this week was my second time overall. So I knew generally where it was going, but I had forgotten a lot of the details. And then the third time I watched it, total, second time this week, I still got more out of it and enjoyed it more. But I will say the first time I watched both of these movies, I left wanting to watch them again, even though I never got around to it. But that's part of the reason why I put them on the schedule, is because I knew that there's a lot to pull out of these movies. And I walked away from both of them the first time, like, I missed so much. Like, I know that there's a lot in this movie, and I know that I missed most of it. So I've got to go back at some point and rewatch it. And I think that this may be a regular thing for me to go back and rewatch these movies, because just in terms of the way he tells his stories is so engaging and so interesting and smart. You know,
right.
It's smart in an intellectual and an artistic sense, in like every sense of the word.
Yeah, and he talks about in the interviews we used along with our movies this week, is that's often his goal, is rewatchability and being able to come back again and again and get something more out of a film, which is kind of nice. It's something that you don't get out of a lot of movies. You can watch it where you just watch it once and you're like, oh, that was fun, but that's it. I'm not going to watch that again, probably.
Yeah. So here's a little clip of Shane Carruth explaining that.
That's pretty much where I want to be when I leave a movie. I don't want to know everything. I want to have enough confidence, and I want to be shown that there was enough meaning that I got out of it to know that the rest of it was probably poignant as well. Mm-hmm. And then I want to go have a conversation, or maybe I want to see it again. Or that's the audience I'm writing for. It's meant to be something that is hopefully good enough to be dwelled on and then potentially revisited. My favorite works, I find that I enjoy them more and more the more I see them. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's my hope. That's my hope for this, I guess.
So that clip really just kind of shows you his thought process as he's making a film. It's not just a lot of pretty images and stuff. It's everything really has a purpose, and that is maybe everything we talked about for Primer is twice as true for Upstream Color. So let's get into that one.
Yeah, so Upstream Color was but it came out in 2013. It is the second and only other film that was written and directed by Shane Carruth.
so far.
So far. Hopefully he'll make more. We're very, very on board for the prospect of him making more movies. But anyway, Upstream Color, in the broadest sense, is an emotional journey, but it's encapsulated in this kind of cyclical plot that's gone on for a little while, and we're kind of looking at the latest iteration of it, between this parasite drug type thing. Okay, I'm just gonna front all this with, it might sound like I'm talking a lot of nonsense, but if you watch the movie, it'll make sense.
Okay,
So,
if you
yeah.
watch the movie, you'll know he's talking nonsense. If you watch the movie again, you'll say, okay, maybe that makes sense. If you watch it again, then you'll start to get it.
Yeah, there you go. And again, with this one, I liked it a lot more the second time than I did the first. But it's this cycle that's been going on where throughout this kind of drug ring of sorts, where they use these certain kind of grubs to put certain kind of chemicals in certain kind of orchids, which are then turned into drugs, which are fed back into certain kinds of grubs, which are then used on unsuspecting strangers. And when it's used on an unsuspecting stranger, it makes them super susceptible to suggestion. So it's kind of a form of mind control. And then one person from the drug ring, in the movie, he's referred to as the thief, I think once, maybe less, maybe just in the script. But he controls that person for a few days and gets them to sign over all their money, and essentially ruins their lives over the course of a week, and distracts them by having them like rewrite lines, copy out the entirety of Walden by Henry David Thoreau, which becomes a very, very big part of the movie. Yeah. And then those people are then saved by another guy who takes the giant...
There's air quotes around saved.
Yeah, there's giant air quotes around saved. But they're saved by another guy who takes the worm out of them and places it in a pig. And stick with me here. Then the pig and the person who's been infected with this worm and no longer has the worm in them now because it's in the pig, kind of have a psychic connection. So if the pig experiences something, the human kind of experiences something, and vice versa. And since the guy who took the worm out, he's called the sampler, keeps all of these pigs together, he can kind of, by watching the pigs, watch the humans who are connected to the pigs.
Yeah, he also has a psychic link to the pigs, which have a psychic link to the people. So it's a weird kind of dominating psychic mind control thing.
Right, everyone's kind of linked together in this big psychic ring. But the story
they don't know
itself,
it. They don't know it except for the sampler. True.
And part of the movie is the process of figuring that out. Even if they don't fully understand what it is, they kind of figure out that there is a connection, and that, to end it, they have to go kill the sampler. Spoilers. We told you there'd be spoilers. But anyway, the main story...
yeah, still go watch the movie.
Still go watch the movie. I didn't ruin the movie by saying that. I promise you.
We can't spoil the experience of watching this film in any way. There's no way to spoil it.
Right. The main story follows our main character, Chris, and her love interest, Jeff, who's played by Shane Carruth. Chris is played by Amy Seymetz, something like that. And they're both two people who have been infected by a worm and have a psychic pig they're connected to. And they meet and they fall in love.
Not having any memory of their time being hypnotized by the worm grub.
Oh yeah. They're after being infected by the worm, almost everyone's life who's had this happen to them is totally ruined, because all their money is gone. They can't remember why. Typically, it's filled in with some kind of excuse. So in Chris's case, it's eventually thought that she had cancer and couldn't remember it because the worm left all these cavities in her body. In the case of Jeff, They think he had a drug abuse problem because
and stole money from his company.
And he stole money from his company and so on. And in the end, it's kind of about broken people, fragmented people and fragmented memories, kind of finding a way to heal each other and break this cycle. But that's about as much as I can set it up via plot.
And
I think that's the limit.
That was, I say that scratches the surface pretty well, and that was a long explanation.
Right.
So, I mean, there's so much in this movie that, one of the things I love about this movie, and it speaks so much to the independent film genre, is that you could never in a million years pitch that to a studio and they'd be like, oh yeah, we'd totally do this. We'll make so much money off of this movie. They'd be like, pigs and psychic worms and a guy who records audio samples all over the place. Like, what are you talking about?
This does not fit into a log line. You cannot. If it doesn't fit into a log line, a studio won't make it.
Yeah, it's
no way. Again,
one of those things that Shane Carruth has this idea in his brain, and only he can make all the pieces work together so that when you leave the theater, you're like, that was good. There was a lot there. Don't know what happened, but I got to see it again.
Right. It's using film as like this communicative medium to say these things that can't really be expressed any way else, which is done so well in Upstream Color. And one of the reasons I had such a hard time summarizing it is because it's mostly an emotional story that is just conveyed through the pieces that make up a film of picture and dialogue and sound and music and so on. But so many of the things that you come away with from the film after your second or third watch and you really start to get it are these intangible feelings and understandings that can really be understood after watching this experience on a screen.
Yeah, so one of the biggest takeaways that we both got from this is the idea of in any storytelling class, be it English or film or theater or anything like that, it's always heavily emphasized to show, not tell. Saying that anything you can tell the audience without dialogue will be more impactful than telling them, and like we were talking about before, holding their hand through the whole thing. This film takes it even a step further to imply, don't tell, in the fact that all of the sensory experience we're getting from the film makes us feel a certain way and makes us make certain assumptions that can't be put into words and almost can't be put into a single visual or action. It has to be cut and music and sound and everything goes together to tell us. Otherwise, like in the film, we make a connection between shower brackets and piglets. There's no way to make that connection without the power of film editing. Like, that sounds insane, and it is, but it works. And
it does.
it literally makes you want to cry when she drops all of these shower brackets on the floor. And it's oh my gosh, I don't know. Watch this movie, guys.
It's the most sad I've ever been about baby psychic pigs.
Yeah, baby psychic pigs, which is a sentence I never thought I'd say.
Yeah, it's interesting. We both commented that our notes have mention of psychic pigs way more than they ever should.
Yeah, like, for any movie.
For any movie ever. It's not, and I'm sad that it won't come back again. But maybe someone else will make a great psychic pig movie. I don't know. But you're right. It does make a great use of the power of being able to put one image next to another and one sound over one image and then carrying those over and mixing them and blending them. And it's very orchestrated. It almost feels, and I mentioned this earlier, it almost feels like an album, like a music album.
Yeah, and Shane Carruth makes this connection in that he thinks, I'll let him tell it.
I'm really curious about what we can do with narrative. It's not for everybody, but I think of it as an album. When you put on an album of music, you get a few things. You get hopefully a pretty good emotional experience. You get a sense that this is something you either want to live with or you don't. And then at some point you put it on again and maybe again. And after a while, you come to find things about it that were not obvious from the get-go, and you come to internalize that work. And then you know whether this is something that's going to be long-lived or something that maybe isn't.
So one of the ways Shane Carruth makes these implications and connects completely different images in our minds is the use of J-cuts and L-cuts in the editing. Do you want to explain how that works?
Yeah. So an L cut or a J cut, they're almost the same thing. They're just the reverse of each other. Is where you have the image cut. So you change the image on the screen before you change the sound. So the sound carries over. And that's the L cut, because once you do that in the editing suite, that's kind of the picture it makes on screen. And the reverse of that is a J cut, is where you have the sound start and then you change the image to the new one. And if you really pay attention, you'll see these everywhere all the time. They're fantastic transition tools.
Often used between conversations. Like if we're in a conversation and we need to cut out of it, we will cut to the image of the next scene while the audio is still going, or vice versa. This scene of Chris and Jeff, where Jeff reveals that he stole money from his company before they go to a banquet, and it cuts between the different locations where they're having this conversation, and you get a little disoriented, and you're kind of put in. Actually, most of the film is subjectively from Chris's point of view, but that's kind of how she's getting blindsided by this information from this guy that she's been with for a long time.
Right.
At this point. But that and the fact that the sampler, who's called the sampler because he's constantly taking audio samples of different things in nature, pushing rocks over also
as well as samples of humans
samples.
He can spy on with his psychic pigs.
There's definitely a double link going on there, but
metaphors.
But at some point he's recording audio, and it's switching into these repetitive office sounds that both Chris and Jeff are experiencing in different locations, and it has this really hypnotic effect, which is clearly the point. It's just so well done in every level.
Yeah, and it's probably the best way to communicate that kind of connection, and their realization of that kind of connection without one of the characters blurting it out. And no one ever says it. Everyone, like the audience and the characters, all kind of realize it at the same time, which is really fascinating. But one of the things I noticed on this film is that there would be like 20-minute, 15-minute segments that I felt like there weren't really individual scenes, but it works just because it flows together so well. And a lot of that is just repetitive use of the L cuts and the J cuts. And it kind of makes
which parts are you talking about?
Well, definitely that one that you just mentioned, where the audio sampler actually goes out and takes the samples of the sounds, and then we see Chris and Jeff at the office, and they dart through like 5 or 6 or 7 locations, which would all be marked as their own scene in any other film, but it's like this 10-minute segment which is all fits together really well. It's
kind of the ultimate montage, I guess.
Yeah, and as we both know, Shane Carruth is a composer, and he composes his music while he writes his scripts. It fits together. And one of the things that both movies kind of remind me of is like a really big, really good concept album where every track flows together really well, and it kind of, you have to listen through to the entire thing to get the full effect because they play off of each other so well. Kind of like Think like The Wall by Pink Floyd or something. But you definitely get that feel. You get that musical feel from the connection of each of the scenes together throughout the film.
Yeah. And in terms of kind of overarching concepts, one of the other things that is sprinkled throughout the entire film and upon further investigation permeates more than either of us expected is the story of Walden by Henry David Thoreau. So we mentioned before that the thief, while having his victims, I guess, hypnotized, makes them do things like recite Walden and quote Walden and all this stuff. And
he has them copy it out.
Yeah, he has them copy it out, and it essentially gets ingrained in their psyche, and that's one of the ways that they end up finding the sampler is Chris starts doing repetitive tasks and quoting Walden without even realizing it. But there's a lot of overlapping themes, and it's definitely the book is definitely a huge influence on probably just a lot of motifs, I guess. There's not a lot of story overlap or anything, but just themes of isolation, social experimentation.
Yeah, I guess the only real story overlap would be the sampler himself, because he's isolated out in the quote unquote wilderness. Like Henry David Thoreau is in Walden, and listening to sounds like you see in the verses from Walden.
Yeah. So the other reason we can tell that this book is influential is that every track in the soundtrack is taken from a quote from Walden, and when I was looking into it, because I haven't read Walden, but looking into it, you can really see the how poetically it is written, which kind of mirrors the poetic tone of the filmmaking in this movie. So here's one of the quotes from Walden that is used in the title of 3 tracks of the soundtrack. So I mean, we can tell that he really likes this quote, and
Right.
it also informs a lot of the style of the music and one of the themes. So it says, after he had lain still there about an hour, he heard a low and seemingly very distant sound, but singularly grand and impressive, unlike anything he had ever heard, gradually swelling and increasing as if it would have a universal and memorable ending, a sullen rush and roar, which seemed to him all at once like the sound of a vast body of fowl coming in to settle there.
But he found to his surprise that the whole body of ice started while he lay there, and drifted into the shore, and the sound he had heard was made by its edge grating on the shore, at first gently, nibbled and crumpled off, but at length heaving up and scattering its wrecks along the island to a considerable height before it came to a standstill.
The whole score has this very swelling kind of a feel to it, and it's very...
It's got a lot of low, deep hum motifs, like sound underwater, like this nice deep vibration that's going on.
Right, and clearly with the pond, and the fact that Chris is always is constantly drawn to water. The thief entices her with water. She is swimming. Often one of her they each have their own repetitive tasks that they return to. Hers is swimming and picking up pebbles from the bottom of a pool. His is linking straw wrappers and stuff that.
I think the pool thing might be a cathartic thing she does, because that's after the sampler drowns their psychic pig babies. I feel like that's almost her metaphorically or symbolically looking for her psychic pig babies.
Yeah, I think she did it before they drowned, but she didn't mumble the words to Walden the first time we see her do it.
Right. The second time is with her and Jeff.
Yeah.
And they're repeating the lines back to each other as they're both remembering it.
Well, that's the that's technically the third time, because the first time he finds her at the pool, hears her mumbling, realizes she's not mumbling incoherently, and starts writing down the words. And then they find Walden and realize she's been quoting Walden from memory. And then
I didn't notice that those were two different times.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so there's a couple different
together.
times. It really does. And it's almost a film that feels like you're watching a memory, and when you're trying to remember it, it all melds together like a dream that you're trying to remember.
Almost, yeah. And one of the things I told you when I first watched this, and it was again after a marathon work day when I was very sleep deprived, was
not
that
a good idea.
It's not a good idea, but it did lend to an interesting experience, because as I watched it, I felt like I was underwater as I was watching it, and I feel like a lot of that had to do with both the water motifs and the sound design and the tracking.
Floating
and
camera.
The music just kind of has that feel of being underwater, which is, what they were going for. So right on. So do you want to hear how I think, at least my own little headcanon, how I think that Shane Carruth came up with the idea for this movie?
Yeah, I like origin stories. Go for it.
Yeah, so he was working on a movie for a long time before this one called A Topiary. That was a lot of work. It looked like it had a lot of visual effects in it, which can be really strenuous for like an indie budget.
Which may account for the long period of time between these two films.
Right. But I have a theory that he worked on A Topiary for a few years, and then it fell through, and then he got really sad, and then he went up into the mountains, or like into like a nature-y cabin of some sort. Like maybe his family has like a country house or something. So he went there for a few years and just read Walden over and over and over for a few years, and then came up with this idea.
And took his sample board with him?
Yeah, and take his sample board out there with him with his waterproof mic and stuck it underwater. And, he just got the idea over a few years of Walden-type experience. What was it in Walden? It's 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days that he spent out in the wilderness.
Yes, a very poetic period of time.
Right. So I'm willing to bet that Shane Carruth spent 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days out in the wilderness reading Walden, coming up with the idea for this movie. Except I know that that's probably not the case at all. And if it is not, please don't tell me, because I'm happy with my little fan theory.
The romantic version.
Yeah. Do you want to hear my other theory?
Yeah, so we're about to get into overall notes, and I think this one spans both of the films. So
it does.
Let's kick off our overall notes with your spanning Carruth extended universe theory.
Yes. So my theory is, it's twofold. Within the stories themselves, especially, it starts in Primer, because in Primer they keep making copies of themselves, and at the end of the movie there ends up being,
at least Aaron does, played by Shane Carruth.
Especially Aaron. But at the end of the movie, Abe ends up with 2 copies of himself, one who doesn't know anything about time travel, and one who does, and is kind of like standing there making sure everything goes right. And Aaron has 2 extra copies of himself, at least, and there's probably more. And that's what my theory hinges off of, is that one of his extra copies is actually the character in Upstream Color, who has memory wrecked by the worm and no longer remembers his experience in Primer, and now he's there, which also makes sense because they're played by the same actor.
Yep.
And the second half of this theory is because Shane Carruth looks exactly the same now as he did 10 years ago in Primer. I think that he either doesn't age, or he has a bunch of copies of himself saved from his own time travel experience. So he can keep popping out a new one.
Yeah, I think Shane Carruth kind of lived his life and created these two movies when he was much older and wiser than anyone should be who is as young as he is and created these films, and then went back in time and created them when he was so young, and that's how he's so smart.
There you go. That's exactly it, I'm sure.
That's great.
Man,
So,
I hope he hears this and gets really confused.
that would be great. Please make more movies, Shane, if you're watching this.
Yes, please do.
So, overall, one of the big draws of these movies is the rewatchability. And I know you had a unique experience with that this week, since this was your first time ever watching both of these films.
Right.
And I really wish I could have been there with you while you were watching them. And I would love to watch these movies with someone who has never seen them before, because it is
Right.
such a singular experience, especially Upstream Color. There's
Oh, yeah.
it's really it's just an experience watching through this film if you're paying attention.
Yeah. They're
is
movies
so
that
hard
you
to
have
describe.
to talk. They're movies that you have to talk about with somebody to really, really enjoy them, I think. But one of the things that Shane Carruth talks about in his interviews over and over is that he wants people to be able to have a discussion and really sink their teeth into the films. And I think you get a lot more out of that when you have another person with you there to have the discussion. And, obviously it'd be optimal to be in the same place and watch it together. But I am glad that we had this experience to do this, where even though we were in two different time zones, we still got to have this really interesting conversation throughout the week, and now especially when we're just spending a few hours doing it, and sink our teeth into these movies and discuss these theories that we have back and forth, and really get into the meaning of it. And you get a lot from it. Like, I think I would have gotten a lot from it if I just watched it one or two times on my own, but I think I got more from it as a discussion piece, as a conversation piece, to really, really, hammer out with somebody else. Like I said earlier, I think it's more of a puzzle than a mystery. So it's kind of like having a friend to work on a crossword puzzle with you. You're going to get a lot farther than you would on your own.
Oh, yeah.
But it, don't let that stop you. Don't think you need a friend to watch these movies with you. Even if you just have yourself, there's always the internet out there to help you along to
and
watch
if you
these
do need
movies.
a friend, message us on Twitter. I am at JS Satchel.
I am always up to sending crazy fan theories to random people who are asking about movies. I will always do that. Or sane
We've got
ones.
enough to go around, yeah.
Yeah, but I won't tell you which one it is. You'll have to guess.
So one thing I want to talk about in terms of just the overall genre, 'cause these both fit into the science fiction genre in very different ways. But after watching them, you don't come away with an impression of that was a great science fiction film. You're like, that was a really interesting look at these two people's relationship. And I think
they weren't like super obviously genre films.
Yeah, but they're kind of the best version of especially science fiction. Because I love Golden Age science fiction. And we're talking like original Star Trek and Twilight Zone, and in literature, Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury. And the thing that defines all of those science fiction stories is the fact that the science fiction is not the point. The people who are experiencing the science fiction are the point, and the way that they react to these fantastical situations. I feel like so much of our science fiction nowadays has become spectacle, and it's become about, oh, look at this cool gadget that we thought up that could never really exist. It's like, okay, that's great, but how would that affect real people in the real world? And these films do such a good job of keeping the humanity in the light of these crazy situations that they get placed in both cases against their initial intentions.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there when it comes to genre filmmaking and the dangers of getting so absorbed in the genre and trying to make it so appealing on the genre level that you lose the sense of what makes films as a medium so attractive to audiences, and in that sense that the relatability and the communication capability that you have in displaying relationships and emotions that you don't get on paper. And I'm not saying like books are bad or anything. I'm just saying like the tools are different and the experience is different on film, and using genre as a frame can be pretty handy, and it can be very fascinating and help draw an audience in to a film. But it shouldn't be like the main attraction is just coming to see sci-fi explosions. But sci-fi can be fascinating, especially when you have these really interesting characters and really interesting relationships between them. And you have that in both Primer and Upstream Color, even if they aren't super duper explicit in stating that. You definitely get the sense of where these characters are at and the journeys they're taking from point A to point B. Sometimes to point C, D, E in both these movies, and then back to A. Back to A in Primer, and then repeat it all.
And I think those relationships are especially important in Primer, and they're clearly the main crux of Upstream Color. But Upstream Color, just in terms of what keeps you watching, it's so visually fast-paced that you can watch it even though you don't know what's going on or people aren't talking and stuff. But Primer really relies on the relationship, because if you lose the relationship between these two guys that we're following, then it's just a really talky, boring movie. But we all have kind of that friend that we can talk through things intellectually with and sometimes disagree with, and so that the tension between them keeps us coming back and keeps us watching through to the end. And then once it gets to the end, it gets much more quick paced, but the beginning is very slow, and if you're not invested in the characters, then you're gonna drop off pretty quickly.
Right. There's definitely this wall of complexity at the start of Primer, that you need the emotional investment, emotional interest to kind of motivate yourself to get over and keep following. Because you're right, if you take that away, it's just a really confusing timeline. So, I mean, it's a fascinating timeline to take an analytic look at, but I think it definitely loses a lot of its appeal if you take away the emotional interest.
So I think that these two movies are interesting to compare with last week, because they're both weeks we looked at independent film, but kind of two different generations of independent film, or two different generations of independent filmmakers. Anyway, last week was much more classic independent film, especially like we said with Stranger Than Paradise. And Jim Jarmusch kind of created an indie style that was picked up by a lot of others, very much in the French New Wave, American New Wave style. And there are traces of that in Carruth's movies, and he cites French New Wave as a big influence on him, which we can see is, I mean, that the whole mindset that fueled French New Wave is kind of the same mindset that Henry David Thoreau was coming from with Walden and his whole literary class of people, I guess.
Right. And just the sheer amount of jump cuts too.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge influence on Carruth, but Carruth also in a different way has a more modern, like you put it, 2010 short film aesthetic. That was the way you described it.
With the extremely limited depth of field and
and it's interesting because all of these elements almost feel like they come from these different cinematic movements, but he also comes to them out of necessity. I mean, French New Wave is that kind of backyard experimental filmmaking. I mean, that's what Carruth is doing here. I mean, he's kind of being influenced and and coming to this style in the same way that the original people who created the style came to it. Just the fact that he had limited resources, like we said, $7,000. He had limited knowledge, study of classic film. He knew,
Right.
I mean, he obviously had knowledge of classic film, but he hadn't taken extensive studying. He was a math major. So he's
Right, he
taking
worked as
his own
engineer for a
fresh
while.
ideas and putting it together really the only way that he knows how, and it just kind of organically evolves into something that fits really well into these new wave movements that we were talking about. Whereas I feel like Jarmusch is more intentionally emulating those styles a little bit.
True, because a lot of those new wave movements, especially the European ones that you see post World War II, came about a lot from necessity. You know, you didn't have the resources to really make big production films, so you kind of had to resort to what became these indie.
And they didn't want to make like the French New Wave. They didn't want to make because all the films that were being made at that time were highly produced, like romantic period pieces, and they wanted to talk more to contemporary issues, and they couldn't get the funding for it, so they had to do it however they could get to it.
Right. So you ended up with all these kind of like jump cut techniques and so on, and that just becomes part of the aesthetic that accompanies low budget indie films, and you know that's what Shane Carruth is working from. And 7,000 is just such a tiny budget.
Such a small budget.
to make a movie that goes to Sundance at such a small budget.
To make such a complex story, and both of these are. I mean, I kind of see these films as Stanley Kubrick using his savings to kind of get one of his breakthrough ideas onto film with no backing whatsoever. That's kind of the level of intellect and intentionality that Carruth puts into his films.
I mean, you can just see the elbow grease all over it from the creative angle.
Yeah.
How much work was put into coming up with all of these compositions and these storylines and these themes and emotions, and you know, composing the music himself and editing it himself. Or I think on Upstream Color he had help, but you know, just taking all of that attention from so many angles is really impressive.
He's so dedicated, and it really, I mean, you can see why it takes so long and why he's had so few so far.
Right. I mean, only 2 in the past 10 years.
Yeah,
and he did have one fall through.
Yeah, which is
part of the reason.
Partially due to the fact that he's not getting more funding. He's not like, people aren't falling over themselves to have Shane Carruth make the next Iron Man, like he mentions in one of his interviews.
And a guy's got to eat, so.
Yeah, so I mean, he's been filling his time with composing and doing various film jobs, but it also just takes so much time to develop something so complex and so layered and so intentional. I would much rather him take 9 years to create Upstream Color than for us to get a new Transformers movie every 6 months that has a lot of bang and flash, but no real substance to it.
Right. Totally agree with you there. But hopefully it won't be 9 years until the next Shane Carruth film.
Yeah, I haven't even heard rumors of a new one, but I am waiting with bated breath for the next Shane Carruth film. We
should start a letter campaign and send him a bunch of encouragement.
Yeah, we start a Shane Carruth fund.
Fund for the future of Shane Carruth films.
That would be great. All right, well, we're going to try a new segment today that may become a recurring thing. We want to take a trailer for a film that has just came out. It came out yesterday as we're recording this on January 20th. And we're going to try and predict various story beats or maybe even the ending of a recent movie. And then you guys can tell us how we did if you guys go and see the movie. So our first movie that we're going to be predicting is M. Night Shyamalan's new film called Split. Here's a quick clip of the trailer, and then we'll talk about our thoughts on it.
I've never seen a case like this before. 23 identities live in Kevin's body. Did something happen?
There's a flower on the pillows, a flower in the bathroom. Like, we're important. Who is that?
Maybe she can help us.
We're here! We're in here!
Don't worry. He knows what you're here for. He's not allowed to touch you. He knows that.
An individual with multiple personalities can change their body chemistry with their thoughts.
Someone's coming for you.
So what are our predictions about the ending and kind of where the story starts and ends and how it gets there, I guess?
Well, it definitely starts with the kidnapper, played by James McAvoy, and he kidnaps 3 girls. I definitely predict that the 2 girls who aren't the main girl, and you can tell who that is in the trailer. I don't know the actress's name, but you can. I'm gonna bet that the other 2 girls are dead by the end of the movie.
Okay. Fair enough.
I'm gonna guess that the James McAvoy actually turns out to be a monster. It heavily implies that he's like a werewolf or something in the trailer, so I definitely think that he's going to become a monster. I also think he's going to be dead by the end of the film. I think he's going to end up dying, and the main girl's going to escape. I'm not sure what the big twist is going to be. What do you think it's going to be?
I have a prediction about the twist, which may be based on some other multiple personality stories that I've seen, which I hope it doesn't fall into the same routine, but it's kind of the only way.
There's been a lot lately.
There's been a lot over the last 5 or 10 years. I think at least one, if not all of the girls, may be one of his personalities, and the whole thing is inside of his head. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know what I also thought? Is that all 3 girls are the same girl?
Yeah, that's the other option. Is that they're the girl's personality.
The girl's personalities. I thought that might be it.
I mean, it seems like something M. Night would do to make it all in one person's head, and we just kind of watched this whole thing, and it was like, oh, well, how much of it actually happened?
Right. But I don't think he's gonna.
It seems a little too obvious, though.
Right. I feel like there has to be at least 2 people, because if not, then at the end of the movie, you'll be like, oh, that didn't really matter.
Yeah. And the therapist could be one of his personalities.
Right.
It's kind of hard to tell.
Man,
it looks like
therapists.
It looks like a demo reel for James McAvoy, if nothing else.
Yeah. He's, they tease 26 different personalities that he's going to have to put on.
Okay, so the tagline is, Kevin has 23 distinct personalities. The 24th is about to be unleashed. So if the tagline has anything to say about it, it's all kind of just leading up to the werewolf thing. But I think there's another layer where someone who we assume is not one of his personalities turns out to be just in his head.
Right.
So we'll see who that ends up being. But I think that's our overall prediction for the film, is that someone who we think is a distinct human is just one of James McAvoy's personalities.
I'm also going to hope that there are 1 or fewer jump scares.
Only one?
1 or fewer, because I feel like this could easily devolve into jump scare country.
I think the trailer had more than 1 jump scare, so we'll see how that goes.
The trailer definitely had a bunch of those jump scare sound cues, but not actual jump scares. So I know M. Night always goes for suspense-ridden movies, because he's got this big Hitchcock thing, which who doesn't? But let's hope he pulls it off, because I want to see a good suspense film that's really psychologically thrilling, and a really good mystery with a really good twist at the end, and not just jump scares.
Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. Shoot us a message on Twitter if we got it right or if we didn't. All right.
Right.
So what do we got on the docket for next week? Coming attractions, if you will.
Yeah, so next week is our first non-director week. It's a theme week. It's Lost at Sea week. And we've got 3 really great movies for you to watch and come listen to the podcast, or for us to watch and then talk about it on the podcast. And you can just say you watch them.
We won't quiz you.
We won't quiz you. This will not be on the test. The first one is Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat from 1944. It's probably the first quintessential Lost at Sea movie. Then we have a couple more recent movies. Life of Pi by Ang Lee, which I really should have seen by now, but I haven't.
Yeah.
And then All Is Lost by J.C. Chandor from 2013, which I probably never would have watched, except that we have a Lost at Sea week, and it does look really good and really interesting.
Yeah,
and
so these aren't
a
a wide range of time periods that they were made in, being as Life of Pi and All Is Lost were just 1 year apart. But I think they do provide a variety of perspectives. A Lifeboat being kind of a societal kind of situation, Life of Pi being a spiritual situation, and All Is Lost seems like just a practical, man versus nature kind of thing.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us, or just want to reach out and also to judge our predictions on Split, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Geringer.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, different Shane Carruth interviews, and also plot breakdowns of both movies. So if you're too lazy to watch them twice but still want to know what's going on, we have 2 videos that will explain what is happening in the movies. And that blog address is jssatchel.wordpress.com/blog.
Yes, please watch the plot breakdowns before you watch the movies if you only watch them once.
Well, watch the movie first and then watch the plot breakdown.
Okay, fair enough. But anyway, that's about all. Talk to you next week.
All right, see ya.